we're going to talk about the Battle of the Bulge. How many of you guys have heard of this before? Okay. This is the largest battle that the Americans will fight in World War II. Okay, we have 3 million troops in France. The British, the Americans, the Canadians. We got some Australians with us. We got all kinds of people. We got 3 million ready to go into Germany. Okay, now Hitler has just enough men for one last desperate bid. Now, what Hitler wants is this. He knows he's going to lose by this point. He wants a chance to sue for peace. What I mean by sue for peace is this. He's going to try and make a move to capture as many Allied troops as possible and use them as hostages, if you will, to try and get a peace deal where he can stay in power in Germany, but the war will be over. We're not having that. Okay, but that's what he's going to try and do. So he, he could attack the Russian lines on the east front, or he could attack the American lines and British lines on the western front. The ones on the western front, most of those 3 million guys have not seen combat yet. They've walked across France. So he's going to pick the western front to try and do this. Guys, we are talking about 60,000 mechanized vehicles, tanks, trucks, armored personnel carriers. He's throwing everything he got at this. He's going to try and pick a spot in our line where we're weak. I'll come back to this slide in a second. I'm going to show you why this battle is called the Battle of the Bulge. Okay? Now, I want you to orient it. This is Germany. This is Belgium. This is Luxembourg. Remember Luxembourg, the little country there? Your maps? Okay? This is where we are. This is the Ardennes forest we talked about earlier. Cash, this is a very dense forest. Okay, and this is where they're going to attack. So this is called mass of force. It's a military tactic. They're going to put everything they have right here into one of the weakest parts of our lines. And they're going to push our troops back. They're going to retreat here 60 miles. Now, they don't break through, but they're going to cause a bulge in our lines. Now, what the goal of Hitler to do here is to break through these lines and encircle and capture as many American and British troops as they can. And again, sue for peace. You guys follow me? Now, Patton, who we've talked about, in the Third Army is down south. He hears about this attack. He puts his men on a 48-hour straight march north. Because what does Patton want to do? He wants to be the hero. Okay? He wants to get there. Now, in the north, you've got Hodges and General Bernard Montgomery of the British 8th Army up here. They're going to push south. Patton's going to push north. Now, the weather is a thing here. It's December. It's cold and it's snowing for days. So there's cloud cover. We have air superiority over Europe. By this time, we control the skies. But if you've got cloud cover over the whole battlefield, you can't use it. You can't just start dropping bombs. You don't know where anybody is. You can't see them. Okay? It's a snowstorm. And it's a dense forest. So the air power is not going to help us here. So the Germans have really good success here. Then it gets really cold, and that's going to hurt the Germans too. They're freezing their tails off. We're freezing our tails off. Okay? Now, you'll notice this right here. This is the town of Bastion. There's a bunch of roads here. It's a crossroads town. Very important strategic city. The 101st Airborne is in Bastion. These are the same guys that Saving Private Ryan was. They were the paratroopers that came in on D-Day, the night of D-Day, to take those bridges. Okay, so if you ever watch on Netflix right now, The Band of Brothers, the 9-episode series, okay, it's about the 101st Airborne, and it follows them through the war, and it's fantastic. I mean, like, they interviewed the guys that survived the war about this, and they used the real names and everything. It's fantastic. Okay. They call these guys the battling bastards of Bastion. They did not retreat. They stayed and they held Bastion, completely surrounded by the Germans. Okay, so that tactic of massive force. So when the Germans attacked Bastion, General McCulloch, the 101st, put all of his men to that point of attack to give the impression to the Germans that there were more Americans in this town than there really were. Because if the Germans knew how few troops were actually there, they would have overrun us. So the Germans come around the rear. McCulloch puts everybody into that point of attack to stop the German advance. And they hold out. Now they're running low on ammunition because you can't put any airdrops in or anything like that. You got no reinforcements. Everybody else is retreating. Okay? They're surrounded. So McCulloch is presented a courier. A German courier comes in and said, you come in with a white flag and say, I have a message for the general from the Germans. And it says, General, you are completely surrounded. If you do not surrender, we will overrun and kill all of you. McCulloch looks at this letter. Nuts. Listen, and he's talking to his captains. He's like, I don't know about you guys, but we're not surrendering. They're like, hell no, we're not surrendering. Screw that. He's like, what do you want me to write in a reply to the Germans? They said, well, why don't you just put on there what you just said? Nuts. So he wrote nuts on there, and they gave it back to the Germans. And they attacked again, and they held them off. And they attacked again, and they held them off. And then clouds parted, they dropped in supplies, and then before long, Patton got there to save them. Okay, they didn't really need saving. They had things under control. It's a great story, okay? Anyhow, so we're going to cut off this Bulge. We're going to capture or kill 120,000, which is basically the bulk of what's the best part of Hitler's army that's left. More and more, you're going to start seeing 13, 14, 15-year-old German soldiers and 50 and 60-year-old German soldiers. Because most of the men of fighting age have been defeated. Okay. So, I'll go back to the slide. So you're looking at about 1.1 million troops between both sides. So about 600,000 American and British versus 500,000 German. Okay, 600 American tanks, 500 German tanks. And let me remind you of the German 88 millimeter guns that I showed you earlier. Guys, this is the forest. And so as those German 88 millimeter guns are exploding shells in the trees, it's sending out shrapnel. We're going to have 19,000 Americans killed in action in this battle. 81,000 wounded or killed in this battle. The worst battle of the war. Okay? The Americans. Germans are going to lose 120,000 of their best men. And that is the Battle of the Bulge. Now, guys, that's a long story short. The battle lasts about 5 weeks. It ends in January. Okay? And it is cold. Now, it's not as cold as it was in Russia that one time I told you about how cold it was in Russia. It's not as cold as the Chosin Reservoir in the Korean War that I'll teach you about in another week or so. Okay? But it was cold. Well, guys did not have gloves and overcoats, a lot of them. They didn't have the warm clothes that they needed. So you had a lot of frostbite, people losing limbs, what's called trench foot. We have unsanitary conditions, frozen, bad. That's how cold it was. These are just, you can see the pictures here. Okay. Give you a pretty good watch that indication. No, we don't have time. It's about a drummer named Rocky Blunt from Massachusetts. I'll tell you the story. I can tell it faster, okay? So Rocky Blunt's a jazz drummer, and he's in the army. Yeah. And he gets trench foot. Like, he wakes up, goes to sleep. He doesn't feel good. He falls asleep. You don't want to fall asleep because she's feeling lightheaded. So they wake up the next morning and his legs are in blocks of ice. And he stands up, he falls down. So they get the bayonets out and they chop the ice off his lower legs from the knees down. He can't walk. So they put him in a military hospital. He's a drummer. He needs his feet. You know what I mean? And he hears the doctors talking about probably going to have to amputate these feet. And he starts begging, pleading, crying, please don't take my feet. Please don't take my feet. I need them. I'm a drummer. And so they gave him a couple more days. And they healed. They started to get better. I don't know if you've ever seen frostbite really bad. It turns the black. Yeah. It's awful. And they show some of that in the video. It's kind of gross. But as soon as he could walk again, they sent him back out to the line. Okay. He survived the war, but those injuries, his feet never the same. It's kind of a cool story. All right. Good. Okay. Guys, did you see the success criteria over here today? Grace, check this out. I can describe Stalin's demands at the Yalta conference, why we agreed to those, and the long-term impact of those. Now, the key word here, underlined, is describe, which means what on the test? You're going to write about it. It's a long answer. Okay? So today we're going to talk about the Yalta conference. Now, Germany, is for all intents and purposes, is done. Now, it's not over, but we know we're going to win. The Russians are on one side, we're on the other. The Battle of the Bulge is over. This is February, right after the Battle of the Bulge, 2 weeks later. The big three are going to get together. Britain, the United States, and the Soviet Union. Now, like they used to do on Sesame Street. You guys ever grow up watching Sesame Street? Which one of these is not like the other? How about the communist dictator that is a mass murderer? And then two guys that are democratically elected as prime minister and president of their country. One of these is not like the other. Yes? Now, Stalin claims a fear of flying. So if these three are going to meet, the two old birds are going to have to go halfway across the globe to meet with Stalin on Russian soil at a place called Yalta. Now, Yalta is on the Black Sea. Here's the Black Sea, okay? Crimea is down here, is the peninsula. This is part of the Ukraine today. In 2014, the Russians took back Crimea. Yalta on the Black Sea, because they don't have a warm water port, they control the Black Sea. The Russians do, okay? Now they're attacking Ukraine, the whole thing, right? That war that's going on, we've been talking about, okay? So Yalta's on the Black Sea there. It's a resort. Now, Churchill really wanted to meet. Is she okay? Get down there, okay?
Yeah, she was just getting a little lightheaded.
Yeah. Churchill wanted to meet with Roosevelt before they went out to Russia. Why would Churchill want to meet with the other Democratic elected leader before they met with Stalin? Maybe come up with a strategy. Like, we don't really trust this guy to negotiate in good faith because he's a dictator. I know he's our ally, but Churchill's a pretty good, shrewd judge of character. And he's like, I don't trust this guy. Like he didn't trust Hitler. Okay? Churchill was the loudest voice against Hitler in the 30s. Okay? And so, but Roosevelt would not meet with him. Maybe he didn't want to make it look like they were ganging up on Stalin or something. Historians can only guess why Roosevelt wouldn't meet with Churchill. Okay? More about that later. Okay? Now, they are going to decide the fate of Europe after the war. Because these three powers are crushing Germany, and they're going through all these other countries to get there. So the Red Army, the Russian army, is going through Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria. He's going through all those countries on his way to Germany. We're going through France, Belgium, Netherlands. What's going to be of Europe after the war? What's going to be of Germany after the war? So that's what they're getting together to decide. Now, first up, unconditional surrender. Hitler is not getting a plea bargain. Hitler is not getting a deal. We are going to invade his country. We're going to take over Germany. We're going to reform it. And all the Nazis are going to jail or being executed. Unconditional surrender. You have no say. Follow me? Now, will this make the Germans fight longer and harder or shorter? Longer and harder. More people are going to die because we demand an unconditional surrender. You understand? The war is going to last longer. We're going to do the same thing with Japan. Unconditional surrender. Everybody's got to go. Okay? And who wants large reparations? Stalin wants large reparations. Guys, remember after World War I, $33 billion that they charged Germany in reparations? What did that lead to? Led to World War II and Hitler. So we're not going to take any reparations. Stalin will. Okay? Now, the next slide is what you're going to write about. These are the demands that Stalin makes. Okay? This is going to affect over 100 million people for the next 40 years. So what is discussed here is of great importance to the world. Okay? So first off, Stalin wants Poland to be a communist country. Remember your geography here. Poland lies between Soviet Union and Germany, right? Right? Yeah. Roosevelt and Churchill say no. They're not going to be communist. Does anybody know whether Poland was communist after the war or not? For 40 years, Poland was under communism after the war. 40 years. This is Pope John Paul II. Pope John Paul II, right? He lived under the Nazi occupation, and then he lived under the communist occupation. Then he got invited to go to Rome, and he went to Rome and became Pope. And so when he was Pope, the Cold War was still, Poland was still under communism, his home country, when he was Pope. You know what Pope John Paul did? He said, I'm going back. Now, in communism, guys, there's no religion. Now, 99% of the population, except for the Jews, most of which were killed by the Germans, right? The Holocaust. Most of the Poles are Catholic. Okay? So, Pope John Paul says, I'm going to Warsaw, and I'm going to hold Mass in the communist country. And he did it twice. You want to see something cool, guys? That's standing up to the man. You know what I mean? Standing up to the man, and 1 million people show up for an outdoor Mass in Warsaw. Unbelievable. You can look it up on YouTube. It's freaking great. So when you talk about what brought down capitalism in Eastern Europe, when the Cold War ended, you can give credit to a few people. And one of them is Pope John Paul II. Ronald Reagan, okay? Margaret Thatcher, the Iron Lady, the British Prime Minister, and Mikhail Gorbachev, who was the leader of Russia at the time. Okay? Those four. Okay? Maybe even that guy that died yesterday at 100. It's all over the news. That guy that died yesterday, that was 100 years old. Henry Kissinger died yesterday. He's an American Jew. Okay? Fled the Holocaust. Worked for President Nixon. Worked for President Reagan. President Carter. President Trump. Worked for a bunch of American presidents. Okay? Some people see him as the ultimate statesman. Some people, as Rolling Stone magazine, called him a war criminal. This is a fantastic book. that Henry Kissinger wrote. Okay. It's about like every major peace treaty of the last 200 years, and all of it like went into it. It's pretty cool. So you can like look up different treaties and find out what happened and the impact of it. Okay. All right. Stalin wants half the reparations. Now, guys, listen. Russia lost between 20 and 25 million people in World War II. We lost 450,000. The Russians lost 20 to 25 million, guys. Okay? They have been devastated. So he wants to get paid. And he'll take his, Hauserman. He'll take his. Now, he promises to declare war on Japan. This is big. Now, guys, we know we're going to win in Germany. We know we're going to win in Europe. But the whole thing in the Pacific is undecided. Now, I got to bring up a couple of things here. How many of you guys know what the Manhattan Project is? Didn't he? Manhattan Project? Okay. This is the project to build the atomic bomb. Okay? Now, in the back there, Cash, and there's a letter on the wall behind Cash over there. See the letter on the wall? Any guys who've been in here all semester, any guys go read that at any point? It's a letter addressed from one Albert Einstein. You all heard of him, right? Theory of relativity. Addressed to President Roosevelt in 1939. And it's a warning to Roosevelt that German scientists believe it possible to split an atom and create a massive weapon with it. So, Roosevelt in 1942 gets $1 billion. This is with a B in 1942. That's a lot of money. $1 billion to start this project called the Manhattan Project. Top secret. They go out to the desert in Nevada, outside of Los Alamos, the desert. And they get the best scientists they can find in America. Mathematicians, physicists, scientists. Okay. They say, look, you guys need to figure this out. And who they put in charge of this operation? J. Robert Oppenheimer. You guys heard about the movie that came out recently, okay? So Oppenheimer's in charge of all these egos, because, none of these really smart guys have egos, do they? So it's like herding cats to get them to focus on building this weapon. But guys, even in February of 45, they're making progress on this, but they don't know whether it's going to work or not. Okay? Now, Roosevelt doesn't tell Churchill. He doesn't tell Stalin. Actually, Roosevelt doesn't even tell Truman about it. Truman doesn't find out about the Manhattan Project until Roosevelt dies. Like a week later, they call him aside and said, Mr. President, we got to tell you something. We've been working on this project for 3 years to build this bomb. Truman's like, what? Really? Okay. Let me know what's going on. Okay. You know who knew about the Manhattan Project before the vice president did? Joseph Stalin did. Stalin knew about the project. The vice president didn't. How did Stalin know about it? Truman didn't. Two Soviet spies working on the Manhattan Project. One was a Brit, the other was an American that was sharing information with Stalin about the atomic bomb. Because, guys, we built it in 45. The Soviets had it by 46. How'd they get that bomb so fast? In 1952, we created the hydrogen bomb, which is a fusion bomb. So the atom bomb is splitting it out. Uranium, highly enriched to 35. 35? That's a fission bomb. A fusion bomb is colliding. much more complicated and much more powerful. The hydrogen bomb, guys, Hauserman, the hydrogen bomb in 1952, 1,000 times more powerful than what we dropped on Japan. This thing is massive, okay? By 1953, the next year, the Soviets had it. Spies again. This time it was Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, husband and wife, and her brother shared the secrets with the Russians. Now, Ethel didn't really do much, but she would not roll over on her brother. So Julius and Ethel Rosenberg were executed for treason, sharing the secret of the hydrogen bomb with the Soviet Union. Okay. Spies. Oh, this is going to be a theme. Pay attention. Okay. Now, he promises to declare war on Japan. We don't know whether we can do. The Pacific thing, man, is unsolved. I'm telling you, we don't know. So, he says 3 months after the defeat of Germany, I will declare war on Japan. Okay? Now, I'm going to, spoiler alert. VE Day, victory in Europe, May 8th, 1945, Hitler commits suicide, okay? The Germans surrender. Celebrate, baby. Celebrate. The Nazis are done. But the war's half won. Okay, so May 8th, June 8th, July 8th, August 8th, 1945. Stalin keeps his promise, declares war on Japan. Does anybody know what happens on August 6th, 1945? 2 days before. We dropped the first bomb on Hiroshima. Okay? 3 days later, August 9th, we dropped the second bomb on Nagasaki. The Japanese do not surrender until the 16th. This gives Stalin 8 days, Operation August Storm, to move the Red Army into Chinese territory. Remember, the Japanese controlled China, a lot of China, in the Korean Peninsula. He had 8 days to move his armies in, and he did. Guys, if we dropped these bombs 1 week earlier, there would be no North Korea. There would only be Korea. Those Soviet Red Army troops went into the Korean Peninsula and set up communism there at the end of the war. And so in 1950, the northern part of Korea is going to invade the southern part of Korea. And we're going to go to war there again. Okay? The timing here is of so much importance, and it changes history. As we're still dealing with these North Korean thugs 75 years later because of the timing here. Okay? It's really interesting. Not done. He promises to join the United Nations when it's established. He does, but then he demands 2 seats because they're a big country. We allow him to take some Japanese islands in outer Mongolia. That big purple blob south of Russia over there, that's outer Mongolia. Okay? And some of the northern islands of north of Japan are the islands that they were given. You can have that. I mean, what is in Mongolia afterward anyway? Nothing. Except Mongolians. Really, it's like the Great Plains. There's nothing out there. Okay. This is the big lie, guys. This is the big lie. Stalin promises not to interfere in Eastern Europe. Now look at this political cartoon back here. Okay? You got Stalin, Uncle Sam representing the United States, Churchill here. You got Stalin reaching for Europe. He's reaching for China, which will fall to communism in 1948. Okay? And so you see what Stalin's doing here. He's trying to spread communism. Now Churchill tried to warn Roosevelt, like, listen, man, you can't trust this guy. But we still feel like we need the Russians to win the war. So they take him at his word. This turns out to be a mistake. They felt they didn't have a choice. We needed the Soviet armies to defeat Germany and Japan. So for the next 40 years, the world will pay a price for these lies. Let me just name a few countries for you that will be under communist rule for 40 years. Poland, already mentioned. Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia. Bulgaria, Romania, Hungary, Czechoslovakia. Yugoslavia, which encompasses the countries we know today as Croatia, Bosnia, Serbia, okay, Albania, and so forth. Okay, they will all be under communism for 40 years. We could have stopped this. We didn't. The question is why? Now we know more today than we knew then. You guys good on these notes? All right. Last year, when you were junior, you were in English class. You all took it. Two of the English teachers had you read this book. One didn't. So we're about to find out. Now, even if you were supposed to read the book, you might not have read the book. But anyhow, the book was called The Crucible, about the Salem witch trials. Raise your hand if you know what I'm talking about. How many had Collins? How many had Cass? The rest of you had... Now, did you guys that had supposed to read the book? What you got to do, girl? Okay. The ones that were supposed to read the book, remember this Salem witch trials? You haven't heard of it. Have you heard of the Salem witch trials? Okay, because this makes me mad. This has been part of American curriculum for the last 50 years. Almost every high school in America has read The Crucible. Okay, so I'm talking to Long and Fox about this, and they're quoting the book. They don't even teach that. They're quoting, they remember from when they were young. It's important because the Salem witch trials, guys. Okay, here we go. Marsha's making funny faces at me. I think she's a witch. Are you a witch? How are you going to prove to me that you're not a witch? Don't you think she's been acting funny? I think she's a witch. You know what we do with witches? We burn them at the stake. You should be scared. When you get that kind of stuff going on, you get the crazies. That's why we teach you that. That's why you read that. So you can recognize it when it happens. When people make unsubstantiated claims against people and call out, who they are as a human being and use it to destroy them. The cancel culture. So, Mrs. Collins, those of you that had her, talked about this. Joseph McCarthy and McCarthyism. Hauserman, you heard of McCarthyism? Didn't he? Freaking missed that. You have a gap in your education right now. I'm about to fill it, sister. Okay? Okay. Joseph McCarthy was a tail gunner on a B-17 Flying Fortress. Now, everybody in this room knows what that is. He's a hero. He gets back just like Bob Dole, and he says, I'm going to run for Congress. And he does. And eventually he gets elected to the Senate. In fact, he was in the Senate with Bob Dole. He was an American hero. And he saw a problem. He said, we got some communists in our government. We know they were at the Manhattan Project, right? Yes? Guys, he's not making it up. There are communists in our government. Okay? Now, let's talk about the definition. Now, before I do that, let's just throw this out there. How many people have the glorious honor of having an ism named after their last name? Lutheranism, yeah, Martin Luther. Calvinism, yeah, that's my people. Marxism, good. Evolution. Darwinism, not very many. McCarthy got one. Okay? And his is kind of negative, you know what I mean? Like, so is Marxism in my view, but in some people's view, it's great. Right? Yeah, okay. So let's learn what this is, okay? Now, you guys remember the first Red Scare? Maybe? Mitchell Palmer, the Palmer Red, this is where they thought America was filled with Bolsheviks and anarchists, and he rounded them up and shipped them out of the country. The Red Summer, the Red Scare, okay? So we learned about the first one. This is the second one. Pay attention. This is the practice of making accusations of disloyalty, subversion, or treason without proper regard for evidence. It also means the practice of making unfair allegations or using unfair investigative techniques, especially in order to restrict dissent or political criticism. The term has its origins in the period known as the Second Red Scare, lasting roughly from 1950 to 56. Now, those dates are important, okay? A lot of what we're going to be talking about is going to be just right after the war, 1945, 46, okay, at the end of the war, okay, heightened by fears of communist influence on American institutions and by espionage by Soviet agents, originally coined to criticize the anti-communist pursuits of Republican U.S. Senator Joseph McCarthy of Wisconsin. McCarthyism soon took on broader meaning, describing the excesses of similar efforts. The term is also now used more generally to describe reckless, unsubstantiated accusations, as well as demagogic attacks on the character or patriotism of political adversaries. Now, I know you're young, and this may make sense to you or may not, depending on how much you know or don't know or believe or don't believe. But to me, when Donald Trump ran for president, he came down an escalator in 2016. They went after him. And they said the only reason why he got elected president in 2016 because he colluded with the Russians to win the presidency. He's an illegitimate president. They spent 4 years trying to prove that and $40 million investigating it, and came up with zero proof that that was a reality. They drug his name through the mud for 4 years. Now, I never heard one person in the media on either side use the term McCarthyism. Unfair investigative techniques to restrict dissent, political criticism, unsubstantiated accusations, reckless, unsubstantiated allegations. Okay, now let's talk about this time. All right, so what do we know now? So listen, when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1989, the Soviets opened up some of their archives. We were intercepting messages between Moscow and Soviet agents in the United States, our military ones. We were trying to piece together these messages and trying to figure out who these communists were. It was very difficult to do. We caught some of them, okay, like the Manhattan Project guys, the Rosenbergs, and so forth, okay, because remember, the hydrogen bomb was 1952, Soviets got in 53, this is the height of the Second Red Scare, okay, so there's a reality to it. McCarthy's methods, here's the thing, his methods. See, McCarthy stood up in front of the American people, said, I have a list of 100 names of communists working in the State Department. Did he ever show anybody that list? Did he ever prove that? Did he actually have a list of 100 names? The answer to all three of those questions is no. Now, if you study this, McCarthy never came out and said, Leah Marsh is a communist. He never called anybody out by name and said, this person is a communist. He never did that. But his methods, who he was hugely popular. I mean, people loved it because people hated communism. They loved McCarthy. In fact, President Eisenhower was president from 52 to 60, said, thank God somebody is pointing this out because it's a problem. Now, guys, is it illegal to be a communist in the United States? No. Is it illegal to be a Nazi in the United States? Can you join the KKK in the United States? Can you be a member of the Black Panther Party? Can you be part of BLM? Can you support Hamas? Be a supporter of Hamas? Of course you can. It's a free country. But maybe it's not a good idea to have paid communists working in your government. As I told Tin, you guys know Tin, our foreign exchange student from Vietnam. As I told Tin in 0 Hour this morning, I said, listen, Tin, we're not going to put you in the CIA. You're from Vietnam. It's a communist country. You can't work in the CIA. I'm sorry. But if you want to work at KFC, you can. That's fine. But maybe it's not a good idea to have a dude from a communist country working in the CIA. Right? That's what this is about. Okay? Now, it went other places that were dark and wrong, okay, out of the fear. So, when they opened the Soviet archives, and then they declassified what was called the Venona Project files, which was the military intercepts, they were able to put 2 and 2 together. So let me read this to you, because a lot of people don't know this, because if you have a history book that's dated before 1994, this is not in the history book. Okay, so I explained this to Ms. Collins. Okay, I said, look, we know more than we did before. We now understand that communist infiltration of the U.S. government during the 30s and 40s was real and damaging. Opening of some Soviet archives and the release of the Venona Project files intercepted wartime and post-war messages between Moscow and communist agents in the U.S. confirmed much of what Whittaker Chambers and Elizabeth Bentley. Now, the guy on the bottom left or bottom right, this is Whittaker Chambers. This is his book. He's a confessed Soviet spy. Okay? And he ratted out other people that were Soviet spies in our government. Okay? And what Chambers said was that this guy was a communist. And he's kind of an important guy, as were others. So now we know, okay, confirm much what of Chambers and Elizabeth Bentley and other ex-communists told the House Un-American Activities Committee and other congressional committees. 3 recent books on the subject, The Haunted Wood, Venona Decoding Soviet Espionage in America, and The Venona Secrets provide evidence that American communists successfully infiltrated all of these agencies. There were communist agents, spies in the State Department, Treasury Department, Office of Strategic Services. That's the precursor to the CIA. Remember when I talked about Wild Bill Donovan and the catcher, Mo Berg, the catcher and the spy? The OSS, that's the CIA. Justice Department, Agriculture Department, Commerce Department, the Office of War Information, the War Production Board, the Board of Economic Warfare, the Civil Service Commission, the AAA, the Army, the Navy, the Congress, the Manhattan Project, the United Nations, and the White House. The highest-ranking Soviet agents included Harry Dexter White, this guy, and the number 2 man at the Treasury, Alger Hist, a key State Department official. Now, let's talk about Alger Hist for a minute. You know where Alger Hist was in February of 1945? He was advising President Roosevelt on Soviet soil during the Yalta Conference. So you had a paid Soviet agent working for Stalin, advising the President of the United States on Russian soil while he's negotiating with his boss. Why would Roosevelt not meet with Churchill before they went out to Yalta? Maybe Roosevelt was being advised by Alger Hist. No, let's not meet with Churchill before we go. More. Alger Hist, Duncan Lee, chief assistants to the OSS. This would be like putting somebody from China as the assistant director of the CIA. That would be smart. Congressman Samuel Dickstein, Lucy Lynn Curie, special assistant to Roosevelt. The authors of the Venona Secrets go so far, and you know this name, Harry Hopkins, who was his closest advisor. I introduced you to him the first day I introduced Roosevelt, who was with Roosevelt from the very beginning to the very end as a Soviet agent. Now, we don't know if that was true or not. Okay. But these others, we do. Okay. So it was a problem. McCarthy's tactics were wrong. And that's why he gets buried, okay, and dies a very lonely man and gets an ism named after him. Okay. But the fact of the matter was, this was a problem. Okay. And pretty soon, I mean, they're going to have the hydrogen bomb. We're going to have the hydrogen bomb. And before long, we're going to have missiles that can launch them against each other. Okay. You don't want these people working for our government. It's a problem. Okay. It'd be like having Iranian spies in our government right now, Chinese spies in our government right now. You don't want that. Okay. You don't want Russian spies in our government. And the Russians were brilliant at this, guys. They recruited Americans to be spies. You understand? Did you guys, how many of you guys saw Oppenheimer? Okay, so Oppenheimer, guys, you know, he helped build this weapon. We used it. It killed a lot of people. That weighed heavy on him. Okay? And he made that known. But some of his associates that he hung out with were communists. They like Hollywood, Berkeley folk, you know, these academics that, and as Ms. Collins and I were talking, remember how these people all came out of the Depression. And so, you know, remember I talked about this, democratic malaise. Capitalism was failing us during the Depression. Democracy was failing us. So we tried different things, right? And so there were a lot of people sympathetic to the ideas of communism. So there was a Communist Party USA, and it was fairly large. And Oppenheimer associated with some of those people, and it cost him his career. You know, they took away his security clearance and took away his job, you know, because he was associating with these communists. Okay? Again, it's not illegal, but you also maybe shouldn't be working for the government if we're locked in a Cold War against them. So, hope you found that interesting, enlightening, and connected a little bit to some of your previous learning if you were exposed to it. 2 minutes? Thank you, Grace. All right. We're going to finish the battle in Europe tomorrow, and then we'll finish Pacific next week. Okay, guys, yesterday while I was showing the movie,